Ho, 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 ho. Ho, 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 ho. Merry Christmas to all you children out there. Merry Christmas and welcome to the Christmas special, Portal to Ascension. I am your host for today. I am Santa Claus representing here. I am the evolved version of Santa Claus, if I do say so myself. And I am here to bestow many gifts upon you all today. And we're going to slow down time. We're going to put everyone to sleep. And with your support, we're going to give every single person, not just children this year, every single person a gift. The gift of Christ consciousness. So welcome everybody. That was my little spiel in the beginning. And I'm really happy to be here with you all. Let's tune in here. Merry Christmas to everyone. Happy New Year's coming around the corner. This is a beautiful time of year. So many things to be celebrating. So much energy accumulating at this time and so much intention happening. So I'm excited to be here for the 5th annual Pagan Origins of Christmas and New Year's Eve. I am pretty proud, I would say, of myself for committing to this 5 years in a row. Always on, I think it's always on December 24th, sometimes on December 21st. But the reason for this, I'll get into in a minute. The reason why I'm even doing this kind of event, but ultimately, is to shed some light and some truth on this time of year, because there's been so much manipulation, so many inconsistencies, and so many cultures have all combined in one, that I think it does us a beautiful justice to take some moments to really look at how we got to where we are, the history of humanity, and how so many cultures all came together to create what we're celebrating since the solstice all the way to the new year. So we're going to be diving deep into it. But before we do any of that, I want to just read your comments and see who's in the house with me. So say hi if you are there. I see a lot of people are chiming in. Please do say hello and where you are from on the planet. Let's get this circle and this energy and all these points around the planet so that I can see where you are. Because if I don't know where you are, how am I going to come and give you a gift? Okay? I don't know. I don't have an inner GPS. I am using Google Maps. So if you give me your location, and I will be able to come tonight and give you a gift, okay? So Margie said she tunes in every single year. We got Sarita in the house. We got Vermont representing. Welcome, Melanie. Michigan. Mary Yule to you as well, Feline. Leicester, United Kingdom. Tampa Bay, Florida. Rachel, I was just in Tampa 2 days ago. Yesterday, I flew from Orlando, but I was in Tampa. Mary Woods, Carson City, Nevada. North Florida representing. California in the house. And South Africa as well, and Chicago too. So welcome, guys. Hope you're feeling well and having a good and hopefully maybe a little bit of a relaxed time of year, because, you know, this time of year, as we're going to get into, has been utilized for thousands of years for a moment of reflection, having kind of like an inner dark night of the soul in some places, but a deep reflection on our connections, our family bonds, what we want to bring into the new year. And even though the new year was shifted from March up until this time, the solstice in general, in these 3 days from the 21st all the way to the 25th, represents a time that has been used since antiquity for really deep inward processes. So we'll be speaking about all of that today. But first, I must tell you why I'm doing this. So a little bit of a backstory. You know, some of you probably heard my story many times. I was raised Hindu. Okay, so I'm an Indian. I'm Indian from Punjab. My parents moved to England, to London, when they were around 10 to 12 years old. I was born in London, and my whole life we celebrated Christmas. Actually, quite a few Christmases, I would be on the full on. I would be like a 10-year-old Santa Claus with my hat, my beard. I would come to my uncle's house. I'd have like a huge bag of Christmas presents. And it was amazing because I had so much family in England that Christmas was just insane. It was just presents all over the place. And since I was 12 years old when I came to California, I had all my childhood and all these gifts, and it was really fun time, a lot of time with all my family just coming out and hanging out, right? So being raised Hindu, but in England, a lot of Indian people, even in the US, celebrate Christmas. It's actually a tradition that we celebrate. Maybe not all of them are into the religious beliefs behind it all, but pretty soon in my life, I had the connection as well of the of Christianity and how that connects to Christmas. And so I actually during Christmas time, I would watch King of Kings. I would watch Moses movies. I was inundated with Jesus type of information, and that's because my mom was really into like historical movies and shows and stuff like Ben Hur and things like that. So we would be watching it throughout my whole life, and I never really questioned why I'm watching something on Jesus when I was raised Hindu. It was almost like a given in my life that Jesus existed. And when I started doing some research, and my parents also told me that in Indian beliefs, they believe that Jesus existed as well. It's not a huge common thing that's known, but it's not denied that he existed. Whereas a lot of other faiths and religions, they deny the existence or even the validity of other prophets. But in Hinduism, the Vedic ways, there is no denial on that, that many different individuals come to earth, become enlightened, and assist the specific culture in those moments that they need it. So there's a different way to approach different people. And Jesus was one of them. Christianity was one of them. Fast forward up until around 2000, 2001. So now I'm graduating high school. I graduated high school and go into college. And I start going into this world of what eventually becomes Portal to Ascension. I started looking into the root of all religion. I wanted to see the root, because what I had found was that there were so many similarities within Christianity and within Hinduism. But these are two separate faiths. One is monotheistic, one is polytheistic. I was told that they both operated and grew independently from each other. But I was seeing that there were similarities to Jesus' story and Krishna's story, right? There's a reason why Krishna has Chris at the beginning, and Jesus is known as Jesus Christ. The Christ energy is also that in Krishna. You know, Krishna was born to a virgin mother, had a carpenter as a father, was known as the way and the light, was considered the savior. He died with a spear, and he died with a arrow in his side at the same place that supposedly Jesus had the spear. There's all these similarities. So I began questioning and wondering, like, well, if that's the connection, so if it wasn't for the Yeshua story, right, I wouldn't have even gone down the rabbit hole that brought me to where I'm at now. And I started questioning and saying, well, if there's all these connections, what is the root of all religion? What is the root of all religion, right? And the root of all religion question led me to the Sumerian scriptures, where then I found the original Old Testament in the Sumerian scriptures, the story of Noah, and it goes on and on and on. But when I first got into this awareness, I started then, the first thing that happened was I believed Jesus did not exist. Because if you're recycling a story from an older story, Christos in Greek text, Osiris in the Egyptian text, and you're going back further and further and further, right? If you're doing that, then is it, and they have the same recipe, Virgin Mother, known as the Savior, resurrection, all these stories, but we're going back thousands of years before Jesus. Could it have been that these ancient people just recycled the oldest story and then brought it back to the Jesus story now? So I then started in around 18, well, I was 19, 20, 21, 22, stopped believing the fact that Jesus even existed. Mind you, I was never religious anyway. I just believed that he was another prophet for a specific group of people. And now I'm full circle. I'm way back into it. Now I'm deep in Yeshua mysteries, really, really far into it, I guess, like really into exploring that, what that really means and what had happened. So today, we are going to be adding a little bit more story time than the last ones. Every year I add more to these presentations. And this year I have pieced together some great information from Paul Wallace and Kiara Winwriter, some other people, where we can, where it's going to be a story So somewhere in today's talk, there'll be a story from starting from Moses, going to 700 BCE, all the way to the birth of Mary and Joseph, and then the migration of them to Palestine in order for them to give birth to Jesus, which is another angle of the story that has just come to me in the last year. So then, as I was saying, I came full circle with the Yeshua understanding, and I started thinking, is it that there's some sort of cosmic soup, if you will, some sort of genetic makeup that has these certain elements that bring in different avatars into this world? And now I've worked with people like Margaret Rigoloso, in which we see that there's ancient priestess mystery schools that were designed, that were able to cultivate, were able to create life through what's known as immaculate conception, right? Divine birth. So now the whole concept of virgin birth, Mary, in my opinion, was not a virgin. However, divine conception, being born without the need for a man because God had already impregnated the woman, is quite possible. But God may be something else. ETs, yeah, I would lean to that. We know about the hybridization program and all that stuff. Is Jesus one of the first hybrids in recorded history texts? So we have this priestess mystery school that goes back quite far, in which they were doing certain rituals to pull in souls into the womb. And it seems that many of times in the past that this kind of thing that occurred. So now I believe that Mary, from lots of researches on portal to ascension and my own experience of meditation, comes from a lineage of priestess schools. We got to also realize that Greek, Greek civilization was still around at that time. Zeus and all that, and Roman paganism was at its stronghold in that moment, at its strongest moment, right? And in those ancient cultures, all the way back to Sumer, it was already accepted and known that God can impregnate a woman on earth. It was a part of the culture. The whole virgin birth thing in Christianity for Jesus was a part of historical pagan beliefs that the gods could impregnate the children, especially when it comes to Greece. I mean, how many kids did Zeus have, right, on earth? So that's just a little short backstory here. We're going to get into the presentation in a moment and go a little deeper, but I wanted to share kind of like how I became full circle with this all. And now, as you're going to see in this presentation today, we're even doing an event on it. I'm doing the Magdalena conference next year as well to really look into more of these details. And this, if you on Portal to Ascension email list, you've already seen. We did 2 days ago Jesus' life in India. We did the Christing initiations with Yeshua, with Vox, shedding light on what the truth of this really means. And it's interesting because you'll see in this presentation, there's not a lot of references to Jesus because he wasn't born at this time of year. If anything, it looks like he was born around March or April. Is more information pointing towards that. So it's kind of what has happened was a hijacking of Christmas. And I feel some sense of desire, I guess, to shed light on the truth of what this means here rather than continue just to take part in the ignorance. And ignorance is bliss on some level, for sure. We're having a good time, having fun. We still have a good time. When I found out the truth of Christmas, I started even having a better time. But we're so far gone from where it even came from, and so many people that celebrate it consider the roots of it as demonic without seeing their own connection to their own ancestors. There's been a severance of our connection to our ancestors. And today, we're going to pay homage and reverence to that. So let's do it. Now I'm going to go ahead and just take a look at the chat here and see what you're all saying. Santa, could you please tell us some of the ancient textbooks references that how you've examined for this presentation? Yeah, as I go on with the presentation today, I'll tell you. That is what my family always believed. Fascinating. Thank you for the research. Okay, strap on your seatbelts, everybody, and jump onto the sleigh. We're going to go for a ride into the ancient past. Welcome, all you beautiful people. This is the pagan roots of Christmas and New Year's, sun worship, and the Christ consciousness. Really attempting to bring it all together today. Question really is, how can the most celebrated holiday that is from a monotheistic religion be connected to paganism or polytheism? Why does Christmas have pagan roots? The origin of the Christmas tree, presents, ornaments, Santa Claus, and New Year's celebration, and the Christ consciousness. And also today we'll be talking about Moses, we'll be talking about Yahweh, we're talking about Yeshua and his name, and we will be talking about some of the lost years of Jesus' life, what happened during those times. So first, we're going to start at the solstice, winter solstice. So this day, December 21st, has been celebrated in antiquity and seen as a significant time of year in many cultures that has been marked by festivals and rituals. It marked the symbolic death and rebirth of the sun. The symbolic death and the rebirth of the sun. There's a connection here to the Mayan calendar. And during this time, the sun, you can see as an image in the back of the winter solstice sun, it seems to stay in the same angle in the sky for 3 days. And it's the darkest days of the year because it's the least amount of light. So it's known as the 3 days of darkness. You guys ever heard back in the conspiracy world, 2012, plus or minus a few years, that there was going to be complete darkness on 2012, that there was going to be 3 days of darkness? Well, that was actually a mistranslation in my opinion, because it did not mean 3 days of full darkness. To me, it meant during the solstice, December 21st, 2012, up until the 25th, and those 3 days in between were the 3 darkest days with the sun at the lowest point that seems to be at the same angle. And it was considered by the ancients the 3 days of darkness. Some gods of the solstice that we have ancient cultures viewed the solstice as death and rebirth, often symbolized by the death and rebirth of the sun. This translated to the sun god of the respective culture. In many tribes and civilizations, the gods were the exact same people, just by different names, kind of like Jupiter and Zeus. So here are some sun gods of the solstice. We have Alcleon, which is Greece, which is interesting because that's the Pleiades. We have Amaterasu in Japan. We have Baldur, which is Norse. We have Mithras, which is Roman. We have Demeter, which is also Greek. Horus in Egypt. Then we have someone you might have heard of before, Krampus, son of hell, the Norse god of the underworld. With the spread of Christianity, Krampus became associated with Christmas, despite efforts by the Catholic Church to ban him. And then the Spider Woman in the Hopi tradition is all about the solstice being sun's victory over winter's darkness. It's very beautiful. It's metaphoric. It's about transcending. It's psychological, and it's literal as well. That the sun is there, and then after that, the sun's light starts getting brighter and brighter every day. This time of year represents 3 days of darkness, and the sun almost at a battle with the darkness, or to say a standstill with the darkness in stillness. I prefer that one, with the darkness. And then the victory over winter's darkness occurs after these days. The sun gods of the solstice weren't always sun gods. Some ancient civilizations believed the sun, the main sun, was the central sun, which is the sun inside of the black hole in the center of the galaxy. That was known as the central sun. And then you can see the Greeks here, they had the Pleiades as their central sun. And now we're going back into some ET connections, because even the priestess mystery schools of the Marys, the Mary bloodline, Magdalena, and also Pythagoras' mother, and back before that, seem to have been really, really paying reverence to the Pleiades. So we have the Son of God. We know who the Son of God is. Son of God is supposedly Yeshua. The Son of God equals the Son of God. The Son God, the Son of God. The sun stops at the same angle and begins to move 3 days later. The sun dies and is reborn. The Son of God dies and is resurrected. So partly why the Jesus story was taken and put into this time now, this is only partly, there's a bigger reason as well that we're going to get into, is because the resurrection element, the Son of God, the Son God, Jesus, is stills in the sky, and then he transcends darkness and comes back to life. It's the symbolic representation of the resurrection during that time of year, this time of year. So now there is something called the Christianization theory. The major purpose for this was to incorporate a widely used pagan holiday. So in regards to Christmas being used, widely used pagan holiday to provide an incentive and excitement in those who were being forced to convert to Christianity. They've done this many times. Easter, for example, is one as well, where they would take these pagan holidays, incorporate it, and then it would give them some sort of familiarity, these pagans, some sort of familiarity and a connection and their own holidays that they could have incorporated in here. And it assisted the church in conversions. But the Catholic Church in general, the hierarchy, did not like the holiday because it was designed to bring the pagans over, but they weren't about it. And devout Christians refused to celebrate it. It was mainly celebrated by recently converted pagans. Eventually, Catholicism did accept Christmas. However, the Protestants held out for much longer and hated the holiday, even up until the 17th century. There was a time where the Christians actually banned Christmas. Christmas was banned. Not too long ago in the scheme of the last 2,000 years, the Puritans in England overthrew King Charles I in 1647. And one of their first items of business after chopping off his head was to ban Christmas. Parliament decreed that December 25th should instead be a day of fasting and humiliation for Englishmen to account for their sins. This is what the notice looked like here. New England banned it at the same time due to Puritans living there. The observation of Christmas having been deemed a sacrilege, the exchange of gifts and greetings, dressing in fine clothing, feasting, and similar are considered satanical practices and hereby forbidden, with the offender liable to fine of 5 shillings. So not too bad of calling someone a Satanist, but only charging them 5 shillings for being a Satanist. So this is the notice that they were putting up all over New England in 1647. There was a hijacking. Pagan traditions and stories created the foundation of Christmas as we know it. Stories from all over the pagan world began being incorporated into this holy day. So even the story of the origin of mistletoe, there's so many levels of what was incorporated. And the mistletoe story, this is how we got mistletoe, is Baldur, which is Baldur's Norse god mother. Her name is Frigga. She honored Baldur and asked all of nature to promise not to harm him. Unfortunately, in her haste, Frigga overlooked the mistletoe plant. So Loki, the resident trickster, took advantage of the opportunity and fooled Baldur's blind twin, Hoorah, into killing him with a spear made of mistletoe. Baldur was later restored to life. Resurrection. Even the Baldur story from the Norse, from the Vikings, has the story of the mistletoe and has a resurrection story in there as well. Christmas trees and presents. The use and purpose for the Christmas tree dates back to the time of the shamans and mystics in pagan Europe before the conquest of Rome. During the solstice, shamans would collect Amanita muscaria mushrooms on December 21st and leave them to dry on branches of the Christmas tree. Right, so these mushrooms down here would grow under this Christmas tree. And the shamans would come to collect the mushrooms on December 21st. They would hang them up on the branches of the tree and let them dry because they were wet, there was snow, and so they needed to let them dry before they could be utilized. These mushrooms, as you can see, they were the original ornaments. Before we had all these other ornaments, these mushrooms were the ornaments. Go to Disneyland, you'll see these mushrooms everywhere as symbols, like the hut of a vendor or something. These mushrooms are toxic, but they become less lethal when dried out. Conveniently, they grow most commonly under pine trees because their spores travel exclusively on pine seeds. So the shaman would often hang them on lower branches of the pine they were growing under to dry them out before taking them to the village. And so the shaman would then come back a few days later. And that day was on December 25th. At that point, the mushrooms had dried out, and then he takes them to the village for use and consumption. These mushrooms are extremely psychedelic. These aren't just the regular psilocybin mushrooms. These are next level mushrooms. It gives you an opportunity to go really deep within. Now, these mushrooms cannot be eaten straight up. They need to be fermented, kind of like a kombucha, and sometimes even digested by something else and then eaten after or consumed in a tea-like manner by the people that were using it. Now, the Christmas tree is a representation of, was utilized because the mushrooms were growing underneath it. But when you would take these mushrooms, it would have an effect where it will affect all of your chakras and open your crown chakra. So the pine tree started being utilized and incorporated from these Eastern principles that the original Christianity also had as well, the Buddhist principles of the chakra system and full enlightenment, where you start with the root chakra as the roots of the tree, and then you go up the chakra process until you get finally to the crown chakra, which is why there is a star at the top of the Christmas tree. It represents the Kundalini awakening, the Kundalini rising, and the chakras expanding. So you either have a star or you have a fairy, but that's basically the supreme enlightenment. So as you would ingest these mushrooms, you would get a sense of awakening. You would be able to purge many different things. During the 3 days, right at the end of the 3 days of darkness, right before the light of the world begins getting brighter again. So much symbolism designed around that day. Consume the mushroom, go up the tree of life, expand the star of your crown chakra, begin the next season. As the light also increases in you, the light also increases on earth. And you can see here is another representation of the chakras and how it connects to the tree. But now we have to do something. I'm going to have to expose Rudolph, everybody. While the mushroom would hang to dry, the deer, so going back to the mushroom was there, but there was deer around. And the deer would come and they would consume some of the mushroom. And as they would consume it, they would get high off the fungi. And they would get so high that they would urinate themselves. The shaman and other members of the tribe would then drink the snow with the urine to get a tea-like mushroom experience. This is believed to be the root of the phrase getting pissed. So getting pissed, back in the ancient days, you know, that's the term in England, basically means getting drunk, getting pissed. Back in the ancient times, getting pissed meant drinking the pee of a deer that was in snow after the deer had mushrooms. And when you would drink that pee, you would get elevated. And it's, see, as I was saying, you need to ferment the mushrooms or it needs to be digested by something else. They couldn't eat the mushrooms directly. So they would take it back and they would ferment it. And they would also use the pee from the deer because it was already digested and fermented in the deer's stomach. And then they were able to ingest it after that. So Rudolph is the evolution of an individual ingesting mushrooms, morphing the symbolism. And then what happens when you have too much psychedelics, guys? Well, you might just see a reindeer fly. So even the reindeer flying is a component of it. And why is Rudolph's nose red? That's because he's eating the red Amanita muscaria mushroom. So the fact that Rudolph's nose is red is connected to the reality that these reindeer were actually eating the mushroom. Jumping over now to who is Santa. The original Santa, there is next year, this is going to be even more evolved. I'm going to add more slides to this because the level of depth of the symbolism of Santa is not even going to scratch the surface right now. And I'm going to go full screen without the presentation in a moment just to kind of like see if I can even relay this information to you that I've been learning. So who is Santa? The original Santa was the shaman that collected the mushrooms with his pointy wizard hat. The mushrooms were the ornaments and gifts spread to the village. The reindeers were a way to transport the mushrooms. The original Santa was commonly depicted as more of a gnome-like man, often skinny and a little scary. So the original Santa was more like this in the bottom here, or at least the one on the left was gnome-like man, often skinny, scary. It looked like a gnome. It wasn't anything like the jolly old Santa today. Okay, pop quiz, everybody. I wanted to add some quizzes in here. I wanted to make sure you guys are on your toes. And here is a question for you. If you win, if you get this answer right, you get bragging rights for 365 days. That means for the next 365 days, you can say that you got this answer right. So I want you to tell me now, in this image here, who is Santa? Which one of these beings is Santa? Okay, taking a little break here. Take your time. I'm going to give you a moment, then I'm going to check the chat. Okay, coming back. All right, let's see. Anybody got this answer here? Melissa says far right. Come on, we have to have more people that know. Far left. Okay, come on. Let's get some votes in. Okay. Oh my God, I can't believe someone got it right. Oh my God, we got two. I never thought that anybody would get this one. Guys, it was a trick question. There is no Santa Claus. Santa doesn't exist. I'm sorry to have to break this to you, but there is no Santa. Your parents lied to you. So I thought I'll just throw that in there just for fun. But we do have a couple of people who got it right, though. Good job, guys. We got Zen. Zen got it right. Sarita got it right. Santa Claus, as far as I know, doesn't exist. So going on here, continuing. Even the show The Smurfs is connected to this. You guys seen the show The Smurfs? The show The Smurfs is literally this story. Look at the house. There are the mushrooms. What do the Smurfs look like? They are gnomes. These gnomes were the gnome-like Santa Claus figures with the pointy hats. And why did they have pointy hats? Because they were the shamans and the wizards. So if you ever watch Smurfs again, you'll see this whole thing is about psychedelics. And the way these Smurfs act, they look like they feel like they're high all the time. But this show is a representation of those ancient practices. Then we have, look at this guy right here with the red hat. That's probably the main honcho. So a little detour on Santa. According to Pericles and his subsequent followers, there are 4 categories of elementals, which are gnomes, undines, sylphs, and salamanders. These correspond to the 4 Empedoclean elements of antiquity: earth, water, air, fire, respectively. His concept of elementals draws from several much older traditions in mythology and religion. Common threads can be found in folklore, animism, and anthropomorphism. Examples of creatures such as the pygmy were taken from Greek mythology. So here is my theory, based on piecing this information together. These individuals, these shaman, would get the mushroom, give it to the community. They would utilize it in order to do a reset. It's just like how kava was used in the Polynesian islands, that they would get around, be able to purge things, speak from their heart, get rid of all the baggage and the darkness that they've been holding. It was a reset of their whole mind, body, and soul, a cleansing, if you will. And as they were doing it, they were obviously elevated and tapped into other worlds. Mushrooms is basically, they call mushrooms the Christ consciousness psychedelic, right? So isn't it interesting how this time of year we're celebrating Christ consciousness and the Christ, and how mushrooms are literally the Christ consciousness psychedelic. Why do they call it that? The reason why they call it that is that if you did a cross intersection of Earth, right, and you saw underneath the soil of Earth, there will be a neural network connecting all of the planet. And all of that is the neural network of fungi. The fungi is literally the nervous system of Earth connected under the soil. So technically, it is a representation of the Christ consciousness. So when you eat a psychedelic fungi that has been connected to the fungi of the planet, you are stepping in to the not only an earthly experience, a really grounded in earth, other dimensional experience, but you're connecting to the consciousness of earth, which is why a lot of the visuals that people receive are basically like earth on a higher level, a higher plane. And as you are doing that, you would step into the elemental world. The elemental world just is another vibrational frequency that coexists with us always. There are certain psychedelics that have been utilized in the past for people to ingest so that they can have a glimpse of that world. So the so the gnome connection, and then the Santa connection, and with the wizard and the shaman connection became all interchangeable because the gnomes also represent the elemental kingdom, and the shamans were the ones that were delivering this to everybody. And in the Smurfs, you'll see many times that they're carrying a bag. So the bag that they're carrying, right, is Santa's bag. Same thing, same structure. But what was the original gifts? What was the original gifts that the shaman was taking from community to community? It was the mushrooms. So the representation of us giving gifts came from the representation of the shamans distributing the psychedelics to the community. And it even shows up in the Smurfs. So back to the elemental beings. They spoke of extensively in channeling info. Beings that are tapped into the consciousness and live in harmony with the earth. It is said that they shifted into a different dimension or dimension between dimensions to escape from human violence and prejudice. There was a day and time where we coexisted, but Earth and humans began devolving in consciousness. When that occurred, we devolved in consciousness, these worlds separated. The story of King Arthur and Avalon being the entrance to this elemental kingdom as well. The story of the Lord of the Rings. You know, in the Lord of the Rings, right here, in the Lord of the Rings, do you remember that the elves lived in their own magical kingdom, that you would have to go through this waterfall, this river, and you'd have to go through these beautiful pearly gates, and it was almost like going into another dimension, phased out reality. And when you would step into their place, everything was more vibrant, more beautiful, and in harmony, until then the orcs invaded there as well in different episodes and series. So what Lord of the Rings is actually alluding to is this story as well. Middle Earth and High Earth. The High Earth was the evolved state of consciousness we were at. Middle Earth is when we fell from grace. But when we fell from grace, elemental beings, and in this case, in the Lord of the Rings, they phased themselves out into another reality, right? So that was what was going on there. Even kind of the Harry Potter story as well, this other world that supersedes our world, that's magical, that you can go and visit, that at one time we all lived in harmony with each other, but then humans devolved and these other beings chose to not follow humanity and go and do their own thing in another reality. So it is said and experienced that by many that ingest psychedelic mushrooms, that they are connecting to the consciousness of the planet. Elemental beings are sentient creatures that are from Earth that we may have once coexisted with. Also, when you take these psychedelics, it seems like everything is alive and breathing. Everything is in waves and moving. The gnome is the bringer and the keeper of earthly wisdom and higher consciousness. That was correlated with Christmas and Santa. The gnome is the shaman and the shaman is the gnome, merging together to bring consciousness to the community. So now back to Santa. The roots of Santa's bags, gifts, sleigh, reindeer, midnight flight, chimney-based means of entry into the home, and even the way we decorate our houses at Christmas led to the ancestral traditions of a number of indigenous Arctic Circle dwellers. So if you guys want to know some of the main places, people that we've pulled all of these traditions from, the Kamachadlis, is that right? Kamchadlis and the Koryaks of Siberia are two groups of individuals that these stories were taken from, including other ones in England, Europe, but a lot of them came from them. Connected to the god and planet Saturn. Santa is connected to Saturn, There's a reason why they sound very similar. Also, the Roman god Saturnalia, right? Also connected to Saturn, of course. On the night of the winter solstice, a shaman would gather several hallucinogenic mushrooms, fly and launch himself into a spiritual journey to the tree of life, which lived by the North Star and held the answers to all the village's problem from the previous year. So as they would ingest it, they would get insight. All the problems, all the issues they had would be answered by this connection. Even Santa's outfit is designed like the mushroom. Black boots for the roots, red and white on the hat and the clothes. Now, Saturnalia. Saturnalia was a holiday in honor of Saturn, the god of agriculture, and it was celebrated in Rome, beginning in the week leading up to the winter solstice and continuing for a full month. Saturnalia, guys, was a really hedonistic time when food and drink were plentiful and the normal Roman social order was turned upside down. Romans also observed Juvenalia, a feast honoring the children of Rome. In addition, members of the upper class often celebrated the birthday of Mithra, the god of the unconquerable sun, on December 25th. Unconquerable sun, right when the sun starts getting brighter. It was believed that Mithra, an infant god, was born of a rock. For some Romans, Mithra was the most sacred day of the year. So what would occur is, on Saturnalia, this was the foundation for even how the elite control today. It was a holiday to blow off steam. And of course, a lot of pagan rituals and things were happening during that time. But what they would do is they would allow the peasants and their servants to take on the role of the elite. And then for fun, they would act like they were the peasants and slaves, right? Kind of like torture in some level. But they would allow for that to happen and enjoy it. And what would occur in that moment, it would give the slaves and their servants an opportunity to blow up steam so that they wouldn't revolt and get upset or angry, or they had something to look forward to. And this, I say, is a template for how we're using holidays today. People struggling, working 9 to 5, hardly any time for family, fun, can't take vacations, 1-2 weeks of vacation a year. But if you're sick for 1 week, you only got 1 week that you can take off without getting paid, right? So little holidays are strewn throughout the year so that people don't build up this energy of anxiety and depression, anger towards the system. And this right here, they found a way in order to be able to do that for those that were serving them. There is something called the claustrum in our brains. The claustrum is a thin, irregular, sheet-like neuronal structure hidden beneath the inner surface of the neocortex in the general region of the insula. Its function is enigmatic. Its anatomy is quite remarkable in that it receives inputs from almost all regions of cortex and projects back to almost all regions of the cortex. We here briefly summarize what is known as the claustrum and its possible purpose. So we're going to have a video in a second to go into that. So what is the claustrum? It's a fluid substance formed in the brain. It's the precursor to the spinal fluid that travels down the chakra system of the spine. This is also known in the past as the Christ oil, the oil of Christ, being anointed by the Christ oil. And what we have now made an external thing of being anointed within churches was a representation of the claustrum oil that is already within us all. As we probably all know here, a lot of the external beliefs and external things that we do are actually a representation of our inner world. It's cerebrospinal fluid, known as Christos by the ancient Greeks, which is interesting because there was also an individual who had the same story of Jesus, known as Christos in the ancient Greek times as well. The fluid goes up and down the spine and the neocortex, which has been related as a symbol of Santa Claus going up and down the chimney. Say it again. The fluid, claustrum fluid, goes up and down the spine and the neocortex, related as a symbol of Santa Claus going up and down the chimney. Even the chimney is a representation of the chakra system, the kundalini, the up and down. And Santa Claus is dressed like a mushroom, the gnome with the bag of mushrooms going up and down the spinal column of the chimney. There's symbolism everywhere. So much symbolism that some of this is actually scientifically connected. So the level of, if you've seen any of the other presentations I've done on Portal to Ascension, the level of genius that these ancient people had with these stories, the overlaying of it all, how to use metaphors for what's going on in our body and what's happening scientifically in our spine is truly remarkable. So now this video here is going to break down the claustrum just a little bit more. Take a moment, check the chat, and then we'll keep going. Let's read what we have here. Okay, let's read some questions. Blue Palladians could be an ET connection. 111 people watching right now, good number. Do you think Smurfs are blue because of Krishna? I never even thought of that. That's a good one because we got Christ, Krishna, and the blue color as well. The Soma spoke of the Vedas is believed to relate to the shroom, and perhaps that is why the cow. Yes. The word Soma in the Vedas is used so much, and people have believed that it means mushrooms. Yes. I also thought of the elves as a representation of inner earth beings. Yeah, and an inner earth could also be a phased out dimensional existence, because I don't think hollow earth, if we dig right now and go into hollow earth, I don't think we're going to find something. I think there's portals and gateways that phase us into this reality. Was it Nimrod, mother that used to adore a tree with ornaments, gods, and gifts? Could be. Kundalini is connected with Christ oils. And what if the Smurfs were blue because of the bluing of magic mushrooms? Could be. All right, so now we're going to play this video. Here we go.
Claustrum. Santa Claus. Neurons inside the claustrum branch out and extend around the entire circumference of the brain, much like a crown of thorns. A group of researchers from George Washington University found that the claustrum can act like an on-off switch for consciousness. In Latin, the claustrum is known as claustrum haematolicurosum. Claustrum means barrier. Hema means blood, and lica means spirit. Therefore, claustrum haematolicurosum means blood to spirit barrier, which is exactly true, since the claustrum is a barrier between blood and cerebrospinal fluid. CSF is a filtrate of blood. Dr. Carey says, it is from the claustrum that the wonderful Christ oil is formed. In plain modern terms, the light, acting on the substances of the brain, forms cerebrospinal fluid, or Christ oil. 3. Cerebrospinal fluid. CSF is a filtrate of blood. In fact, there is a perpetual exchange occurring between blood, CSF, nerve or interstitial fluid, sexual vital fluids, and lymph. At the claustrum blood CSF barrier, the body turns water into wine every second.
I'm sure you already are, but just to say, like, how each component of even how it looks like a head of thorns, so many components of the stories that came after it are just within this understanding of the claustrum.
Water symbolizes blood, and wine symbolizes CSF, spiritualized substance. CSF has a significant charge. It is saline, salty with minerals, and alkaline, meaning electron-rich. CSF is secretly known as the blood of the lamb. The ventricles are even shaped like ram horns, hence the esoteric affiliation with Aries. CSF is the most electrically conductive fluid in the body. The breath charges CSF. The great regeneration relies on the charging and transmuting of this subtle fluid. The Kundalini utilizes that which is termed spinal fluid. It actually ionizes CSF and changes its molecular structure and consequently the basic DNA structure of the entire body. Dr. Zapatero says CSF acts like a storage field and conveyor for light energies.
So just a little bit there on the connection, the scientific connection of what's going on in the brain with Santa energy, with the clouds and the chimney. So now Saturnalia once again. So the period I said before, it goes for up to a month, but December 17th to the 23rd was the main part of it. And is when this god Saturn ruled. So the reason why they celebrated it is because there was a time in ancient history, as according to the Romans that go back to other ancient cultures as well with different names of gods, where Saturn ruled Italy, but it was probably somewhere else in the world at that point. Obviously, they try to make the whole world think that they were the original race everywhere. And there was complete equality and no slavery. So when Saturn ruled, it was all in harmony. So that's why the slaves became the masters for the festival. It was a balancing act. It provided them with a day to blow steam. And as I said, it was rarely used to reinforce slavery rather than focus on equality. December 25th was considered to be the birthday of the Roman sun god Sol Invictus and a celebration of Kronos, god of time, which Kronos is the god of time, and the Titans, or the giants. But it's interesting because Kronos is Saturn. Sol Invictus is the sun god. So there is a connection here with Saturn and the sun god, and there was a shift from Saturn worshipping to sun worshipping that occurred around this time as well, after Yeshua's birth and death. Sun is at its lowest ebb at this time, so the sun looks like it's the closest to Earth in this moment. So here's the Santa equation. Then after this slide, I'm going to stop to give you kind of a historical things I pieced together in the last 2 years when we go back from Moses all the way to Yeshua. So we have Santa Claus, which is Father Christmas, right? Father Christmas. Father Christmas is the father of time, the father of time. Father time is Kronos, the father of time. The father of time is the god of Saturn. This is the Santa equation and how Santa, so you can go to the front here, Santa Claus equals the god of Saturn. It was a representation of Saturn. Santa Claus is Father Christmas. That's what we call him in England. And why is he the father of time? Why is he the father of time? So question to everybody in the chat, why is Santa Claus the father of time? Why is Santa Claus the father of time? What does he do that gives him that ability, gives him that title? What is it that he actually does? Give you a few seconds. If not, I'll just tell you. Well, the reason why he's the father of time is going once, going twice. Yes, Mary. He can go all around the world in a single night. How can you visit every single house in the night? You stop time. Father Christmas, Santa Claus, Saturn and Kronos. Saturn is the Saturn moon matrix, the third dimensional broadcasting system for the linear time that we live within. This goes into even deeper esoterics that we'll get into our Saturn conference next year. That Saturn moon matrix connection broadcasts a signal, creating linearity and holding us in a third dimensional reality. Kronos and Saturn were the gods of time. Father Christmas is a representation of that. So Santa has represented many gods, gnomes, shamans, actual historical figures, and possibly more. This is only one evolution of Santa, because people say there was a guy called Krampus. There was actually a Saint Nicholas, a Turkish cardinal in the 14th century, who was known for his kindness to children. This was the immediate connection when Christians began adopting the holiday. However, all elements of Santa, including the pants, hat, bag, all originated from pagan shamanic stories. And then, of course, in the 20th century, Coca-Cola played a role. in the rebranding of Santa Claus. He went from a gnome-like being that people are scared of to a chubby, happy-go-lucky Santa we know now. Why is it even the story of the naughty list? Oh, be nice or you're going to be on Santa's naughty list, because Santa was a scary gnome that people were afraid of. The original gnome structure. That's what it became. It wasn't like that before. It was a shaman, but it had become that. It had been demonized. Then we have the modern Santa. So after this, we're going to get a New Year's. So I'm going to pause after this one and give you guys the historical perspective here. So one of the first illustrations of Santa Claus was in 1862, when American, so I'm telling you how it evolved to now what we see Santa as. When American Civil War cartoonist Thomas Nast drew a little elf supporting Union soldiers at Christmas. This image would serve as the image for Coca-Cola. And then in 1930, artist Fred Mizan painted a Santa drinking a bottle of Coca-Cola in a department store. So in 1931, Coca-Cola commissioned illustrator Haddon Sundblom painted Santa for Christmas advertisements. Those paintings established Santa as a warm, happy character with human features, with rosy cheeks, white beard, twinkly eyes, laughter lines. The transformation of the current Santa was the product of Swedish artist Haddon Sundblom, who, commissioned by the company, changed the traditional and more pious image of Christian folklore into the Santa of our days. So if it wasn't for the beginning of 1862 and 1930, the Santa as we know it would not exist. All right. So the next part of this is going to be New Year's. But before we do that, let me tell you guys a little story of information I've been collecting over the last couple of years. Paul Wallace's book, the Sumerian Scriptures, and Old Testament, some ancient texts from India from 65 AD, the book Isa, Son of the Sun by Kira Windwriter. These are my source texts for this. And a lot of other people that have presented on these topics as well. So let's go back now. Even Jordan Maxwell, take you far back into the time of Moses. So now when Moses was around, the story goes that he took the slaves out of the promised land. So from my understanding, the Israelites were not actually slaves. What had occurred is that at that time, the Israelites, they weren't even Israelites. They were a nomadic tribe, and there was a war, and they had commissioned the Egyptians to fight this war for them as mercenaries, in order to help them win this battle and not be conquered. The exchange after this happened was that this tribe, the future Israelites, would have to work as indentured servants until the debt was paid off to the Egyptians. So they weren't actually conquered and made into slaves. They were paying off a debt for this war. The time for this debt had finished. Now Moses was around. Whether Moses existed or not, I don't know. But the story is that he took the Israelites, the future Israelites, out of Egypt, but he was willingly allowed to take them. That the whole story of like the Pharaoh going after him and all this stuff there's a lot of fabrication to it. And as he took them out, he also took the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was an Egyptian technology that had been kept in Egypt for quite some time, possibly even passed down by Atlantis. If there was a retaliation from the Pharaoh, it was probably because they stole the Ark of the Covenant. If they stole it, because they could have just taken it, it could have been given to them, I'm not sure. And as they went to future Palestine, it took them 40 years to get to the promised land. You can make it across, here, let me show you right now. You can make it to Palestine in way less than 40 years. And here's an image I'm going to show you guys. All right, just for fun. Okay, sorry, we can't get directions from Egypt to Palestine. Let's see. Let's do Cairo. Okay, look. So this is where Moses was, right? And then he leaves, and it takes him 40 years to get to here, around this area. So if you walked right now, it would take you 8 days by foot to get there. Okay. Say you took a break every few days or so, or every day you took a day off, you still be there within 2 weeks. So why did it take him 40 years to get to the promised land? Well, if you look at the Old Testament story, what was happening was the Ark of the Covenant would levitate, and they weren't carrying the Ark of the Covenant, it would guide them. The Ark of the Covenant would levitate, it would move, and then it would stop, and they would set up camp around the Ark of the Covenant, and then they would not move again until the Ark was ready to take them to the next place. So they were all around the desert, going all over the place, until it eventually took them to the promised land. So it took them 40 years to get there. So in the story about how Moses died because God said that he did something and he wasn't allowed to go to the promised land. My opinion, that's a fabricated story. He was over 80 years old by the time they got there. Chances are he died of old age. So, but as they were going, when they were in Egypt, they worshipped a god called Isis. You might have heard of Isis, because Isis was the benefactor to the indentured servants. They had no real God. They didn't have a deity. There was no Yahweh. There was no Israel God. They were worshiping Isis. When they were in the desert, and it took them all this time to get to Palestine, they worshipped Ra Amen. Ra Amen. And the reason why they worshipped Ra Amen is because Ra Amen was the sun god, and they were in blazing sun, and they were worshiping the sun god to protect them as they were on their journey, which is why in Christianity and Judaism, we have the word Amen. And then when they arrived to Palestine, the promised land, what they found there was a group of people called the Phoenician Canaanites. The Phoenician Canaanites occupied Jericho. And when they before they conquered Jericho and the other cities around there, they also ended up adopting the god that was worshipped in that area, Elohim. So we have Isis, Ra Amen, Elohim. Isis, Ra Amen, Elohim. Israel. Isis, Ra Amen, Elohim. So the word Israel didn't come about, or Israelites didn't come about, until those three gods had all come into one, three powerful ones. When the Israelites were going through the desert, they ran into the Zoroastrians. The Zoroastrians taught them about monotheism. Monotheism then started becoming something in 700 BCE. 700 BCE. The reason why I tell you this story here is in 700 BCE, there was a mass thing that happened on the planet, which it seemed like there was a mass move to monotheism. But it was also the time where the 12 tribes of Israel were at war with each other in modern Palestine. And then one of the tribes hired the Assyrians to fight the other tribes. The Assyrians in 700 BCE took over this land, the whole land, and they exiled 10 tribes of Israel. And this is all documented in historical books. But where they were exiled to is not shared. They were exiled to Kashmir. And one of those tribes was the tribe of Mary and Joseph. Fast forward a few hundred years later, Mary and Joseph is born in Kashmir. The archangel Gabriel comes to Mary in a Vimana, which is a UFO in Indian text, and tells them about this being that was going to be born, and that they needed to go back to the land of their ancestors for this being to be born. So the journey from Kashmir to back to Bethlehem, the promised land, begins. And when they're on that journey, they stop over and they meet the Essenes. They go and connect with Anna, the grandmother of Mary that lived in the Essene community, his sister, and also John the Baptist, which was the cousin of Yeshua. So This is the story that I'm piecing together from ancient Indian texts and from Kiara's information here. But the reason why I want to talk about this in particular is the connection to Saturn and the sun god. So in ancient Hebrew, you have the word Yeshua, and Yeshua translates in Hebrew to Yahweh's salvation. Yahweh's salvation came down to earth to bring Yahweh's salvation. But if you look back at the ancient Aramaic translation of Yeshua, it means salvation from Yahweh. Salvation from Yahweh. So do you see there how both of those meanings are completely opposite from each other? So in one train of thought, he came down to correct people to still worship Yahweh. But in the other train of thought, he came down to tell people that they were worshiping a false god, a false powerful one, maybe an Anunnaki or the god of Saturn, and correct the record. Which is why in Judaism, they had their worship on the Sabbath. The Sabbath is Saturn Day. Saturn Day. So now full circle here with Santa Claus. The Sabbath is Saturn Day. Yahweh pretended to be the main god, the sun god. But if you look at ancient texts, he was actually one of the lowest level of the powerful ones. He was one of the only Anunnaki that wasn't given land on earth. He had to fight for it and get it himself and conquer other Anunnaki. You will worship no other powerful one but me, he told Moses. Who are the other powerful ones, right? And then when Yeshua came to earth, Yeshua didn't come to continue the lineage, but to shift the lineage in order to correct the record to the sun. Son of God, the sun worshiping. So we went from Saturn worshiping, which was in Judaism, to sun worshiping, which is in Christianity, which is why during December 21st to 25th, we have the combination of Saturn and sun worshiping because of all these ancient cultures that were worshiping those specific deities and energies during that time. So, of course, the story is much a longer one. Hopefully, you guys understood that there. I try to piece together as much of it as I can. We'll be creating a presentation on that sometime in the future. And we have other people, Paul Wallet's interview on our channel and Kiara Winwriter's webinar a couple days ago that brings in pieces of it. But there's so many things that I've noticed with speakers is that some speakers, they are so into their research, they never get an opportunity to listen to other people's research. And just from the position I'm in, where I'm getting an opportunity to curate so many different events with different people, I'm seeing where there's a lot of crossover and connections there. Yeah, and then I saw a comment there, the Mediterranean and the Kush area. That's a whole other story of the kingdom of Kush and the Indus Valley civilization. So now let's jump over to New Year's Day. There is scarcely a people, ancient or modern, savage or civilized, which has not observed it. In one form or another, yet no festival has been celebrated on so many different dates or in so many seemingly different ways, Theodore Castro said in his book, The New Year. Let's talk first about the Julian calendar history. Christmas has been closely connected to New Year's Day since the days of Julius Caesar. The original date for New Year was March 25th. And we can partly thank the Roman king Numa Pompilius during his reign, 715 to 673 BCE. Numa revisited the Roman Republican calendar so that January replaced March as the first month, but it was not widely accepted or implemented for many hundreds of years. Since January was named after Janus, the Roman god of all beginnings, March celebrated Mars, the god of war. Some sources claim that Numa also created the month of January. However, there is evidence that January 1st was not made the official start of the Roman year until 153 BCE. So after he had said this, they didn't really adopt it until 153 BCE. But then we have in 46 BCE, we have Julius Caesar. He then introduced more changes and though the Julian calendar, as it became known, retained January 1st as the year's opening date, with the expansion of the Roman Empire, the use of the calendar was also spread. But after the fall of Rome in the 5th century CE, many Christian countries altered the calendar so it was more reflective of their religion. And March 21st became the common New Year's once again. So it was going back and forth for a while. And, March 21st in the Christian world, all the way up to 1582, Most of the Christian world still celebrated New Year's on March 25th. But it became clear that the Julian calendar required additional changes due to a miscalculation concerning leap years. The cumulative effect of this era over the course of several centuries caused various events to take place in the wrong season. It also created problems when determining the date of Easter. Pope Gregory the 13th introduced a revised calendar in 1582. So now we have the Gregorian calendar. So the Gregorian calendar came in 1582, which was an addition to the Julian calendar. In addition to solving the issue with leap years, the Gregorian calendar restored January 1st as the start of the new year, and Italy, France, and Spain were among the first countries that accepted this, but Protestant and Orthodox nations did not accept it yet. Great Britain and the US colonies, they were following the Gregorian calendar. They did not begin following the Gregorian calendar that we use now until 1752. So it was like a 2,000-year process of shifting this calendar until it became the main calendar in the world. The new year was celebrated in Mesopotamia in 2000 BCE, around the time of the vernal equinox, which occurred again in March 25th. So even in ancient Sumer, they were worshiping it on that time, or they were celebrating it. There were barely 10 months left at that time. The calendar at the time was based on the seasons, and the planting season began in March, because it makes sense. March is season, spring, things are blossoming. So that was the time of year for new beginnings. This eventually shifted to December and was celebrated with a 12-day festival called Zagmuk, which literally means beginning of the year. It celebrates the triumph of Marduk, the patron deity of Babylon, over the forces of chaos, symbolized in later times by Tiamat. Again, we have a conquering in this time about light conquering darkness. It celebrates the triumph of Marduk, the patron deity of Babylon. There we go. Here's a clay tablet from Sumer on Marduk. And note it's the serpents over here too. So something that has been spoken about a lot within these communities, and awakening communities, is the Council of Nicaea. There was a shift and a hijacking of Christmas for sure, but there was also the hijacking of Christianity that occurred. Before the Council of Nicaea, we have the Gnostic individuals, we have the Essenes, and we have a lot of information and texts that were actually taken out of the Bible. Thus said the Lord, learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them. That's in the King James Bible. The King James Bible is rarely commonly known and accepted by the Christian world. A lot of times when you ask someone what they go to Bible is, they'll say the King James Bible. But it's interesting to me that the King James Bible is the most manipulated Bible of all time. King James was responsible for the witch burnings that then swept most of the planet, a lot of the planet. So in this Bible version, many different verses and stanzas are actually added to the original text. In the Council of Nicaea, there was a debate. This is what occurred during it. So there's a lot of speculation, texts were taken out. But what actually was the main reason was there was a debate over who Christ was. So all the main popes of the Christian world and priests were brought in. Was he a man who became ascended, quite like the Buddha, and enlightened, or was he actually the incarnation of God? Before the Council of Nicaea, the belief was he was an enlightened human, and the belief was he was an enlightened human. Basically, anyone could be like him. That was the belief before the Council of Nicaea. And during the Council of Nicaea, believe it or not, that belief was withheld, that he was an enlightened human. But when that belief was withheld, the main masses in the public didn't want to accept that. They wanted to accept that he was God incarnated. So they overthrew the belief that he was an enlightened human, and they adopted that he was actually God incarnated himself, which for the last 350 years before that was not the belief. And now this is the shift of everybody can be like Jesus to there is only one Jesus and he is the only way to salvation. This was a political move on the part of whoever was ruling at that time as well, where it centralizes all power into the central deity without the individuals knowing that they have the ability to be Christ-like themselves. And they could also ascend and reach levels of consciousness just like Yeshua did. There was also a debate of what gospels would be utilized. There's something called the Moratorian Canon, which is believed to date around 200 AD. It is the earliest compilation of canonical texts resembling the New Testament, but it was not until the 5th century that all the different Christian churches came together to create a basic agreement on the biblical canon. 500 years later, after the supposed existence and life of Yeshua, 350 years or so after his death, we start having gospels taken out and added and all this. And then 5 centuries after his death, we have an actual canon coming together as a biblical canon. So to think that there couldn't be any manipulation, political moves, man-made BS added to it, I would see as a far stretch, because that is the nature of humanity when it comes to things like this and when greed and politics are involved. So other places that celebrated New Year's, Babylonian Akitu, 4,000 years ago, they also did it in March. Babylonian Mesopotamia honored the rebirth of the natural world with this festival. We have Janus in Rome, ancient Rome, 2,000 years ago. Years of tampering with the solar calendar eventually established the holiday on January 1st. January carried special significance, the god of change and beginnings. Janus was seen as symbolically looking back at the old and ahead to the new, which is why he had 2 faces. And this became tied to the transition from one year to the next. It was common for friends and neighbors to exchange well wishes and gifts on this day. According to the poet Ovid, most Romans chose to work for at least part of New Year's Day, as an idleness was seen as a bad omen for the rest of the year. So even the whole concept, I don't know if you guys have heard this, but my friends have even said it, that what they do on New Year's Eve, is a reflection of what's going to be happening for the rest of the year. The Romans believe that as well. And they worked half the day on New Year's Eve, which is actually what pretty much most businesses do now. They work half the day, they close, and then they closed on actual New Year's Day. In ancient Egypt, we have Wepet Renpet, when Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, first became visible after a 70-day absence, usually in mid-July. Wepet Renmet means opening of the year. The new year was seen as a time of rebirth and rejuvenation. Discoveries at the Temple of Mut show that the first month of the year played host to a festival of drunkenness. This was tied to the myth of Sekhmet, a war goddess who had planned to kill all of humanity until the sun god Ra tricked her into drinking herself unconscious. The Egyptians would celebrate with music, sex, and alcohol. Then other New Year's celebrations. Chinese New Year's, we can trace that back for 3,000 years, also in March. Nowruz in Iran, the Zoroastrians also celebrated then. Evidence suggested this day was celebrated as far back as 6th century BCE, all the way to the 7th century AD. So we can track back a sun-worshipping ritual in Mesopotamia called Babylonian Akitu, 4,000 years ago. I shared that just before. Christmas, solstice celebrations, New Year's Day are sun-worshipping days. We feel that a lot of people feel that it's connected to God, and there is some essence of creation there. But if it really is connected to an actual God, if there is a God that is some sort of universal figure or some sort of universal energy, it seems like these days are representations of the cycles that are happening on Earth and our connection to the celestial bodies that give us life and sustain humanity. So Christmas was a day like that. Saturnalia was a day like that. The Saturn one connects to even deeper esoterics of what's going on with Saturn and its rings and how it's become demonized even. And with Satan, even the connection to Satan, we didn't even get into that. Santa, Satan, Saturn, that connection there. So New Year's Day, of course, we're celebrating our rotation around the sun. These are days to worship the sun in ancient times. Remember, I spoke about Amun-Ra, the Egyptian sun god. So obviously, we've been worshiping the sun for quite some time. There's times where things shift, where we worship other celestial bodies, and we are still in sun worshiping phase. 2,000 years ago before, you see actual sun worshiping, and then you see Christ. And when you see Christ come onto earth, all of a sudden you don't recognize that this is actually still sun worshiping. the Son of God is a representation of our devotion to the Son, which is why the Sun God became the Son of God. We see in many ancient civilizations a movement to pick one god, and in most cases it was the sun god or god of Saturn. Sometimes Saturn and the sun god are the same god. There was some beings, because I believe that there were some ETs on the planet, that these Anunnaki were there, the Yahweh was an Anunnaki figure, and they basically tricked humanity into thinking that they were the central sun god, the main god, when they really weren't. And if you look into Paul Wallace's work and the Old Testament information, you can see that the Yahweh is a huge trickster. And Yahweh killed, in the Old Testament, Yahweh killed millions of people. Satan, 0. Right? So there is a manipulation going on there. And then Yeshua comes down, and there's a shift to the central sun of our solar system. Even though there was sun worship that may have been the main god, different gods worship different people worship different gods at different times. They would rise and fall. Even though we may think of polytheistic civilizations may have worshipped the sun, we worship the sun more now than ever, but we have other beings that we've personified as our direct connection, not realizing that there are ancient personifications of the sun, like Jesus. And I believe Yeshua existed, but I also believe many stories that had nothing to do with his life was also added to him. And you can actually prove that by looking at the different people and what stanzas and what phrases and what things they added to his story, including the crucifixion. I'm now at a belief that Jesus did not die on the cross. He was crucified, but he survived. And then he moved to India afterwards, lived the rest of his days out in Kashmir after visiting Egypt. The celebration of New Year's is never once commanded in the Bible. Jesus and the apostles never observed it. Moses forbade it. So I feel that they were also even attempting to take you away from worshiping external bodies. These real prophets weren't here to take you to make you worship something external to you. It was to help you observe your inner world. And that maybe that's even why Yeshua and his apostles never observed it and Moses forbade it. Why worship something outside of you? The kingdom of heaven is within. So some things to ponder. Will there be a day when we stop worshiping the sun? And will solstice celebrations and New Year's Days celebrations go? What will happen once we become conscious of how blind we have followed rituals? Will our awareness of how blind we follow rituals and how the ancient connection to all these traditions, will it add more to us since now we can be more intentional with it? Instead of worshiping the sun, maybe we'll give reverence and gratitude to it, but not base our existence on the worship. What comes after the sun worship is the next question. We had Saturn worshiping cults, we have moon worshiping cults, we had cow worshiping cults. Cults are just faiths that became religions. Now we have sun worshiping cults. What's next? What happens as we shift from sun worshiping to the galactic community we are? Will we now move to galactic reverence? Will we go back to what the ancients called the central sun, what the Mayans called the central sun, and instead of worshiping the central sun, giving reverence to this massive black hole in the center of the galaxy that holds all of our galactic community together? So thank you all for tuning in today. I'll just like to say some words. Mary Mushroom, Christ Consciousness, Spiritual Awakening, Tree of Life, Pagan, Sun, Seasonal, Awakening, Santa Claustrum, Spinal Fluid Reverence Day. And I hope you guys have a beautiful, beautiful time over the next few days. Take some time to yourselves, reflect, spend some time with your family. Because 2025, guys, is going to be an epic year. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Going to check in with you guys and see what you have to say before we go. No, okay. No, I don't think Jesus wanted to teach people to worship the sun. I think that people ended up doing that instead of his beliefs. I believe he was trying to teach us something deeper, but it got hijacked and they became a worship of the external rather than honoring the internal. Yep. Zen gets made a good point. I think it's interesting we're still worshiping the sun, and yet we say good morning as saying the sun is dead. We're living in a paradox. Do you believe that the tomb of Joseph in Srinagar, Kashmir is a real Yeshua? Yeah, so we just did an event 2 days ago on that, and I feel it could really be Yeshua's tomb in Kashmir. You guys, if you guys did not sign up 2 days ago for Kiara's event, I'm just gonna post it in the chat, okay? Oh my God! And read the book Son of the Sun. It was so incredible. It really changed my perspective on deeper level to my connection. Here, I'm gonna send this to you. Put it in the chat. Okay, and since I got, let's keep reading here. By the way, guys, I'm about to jump on Tim Tactics webinar. He's doing a Christmas special. It's live. You type in Tim Tactics on YouTube. I'll be on there in 30 minutes also talking, but I'll probably say some of the same stuff. But he's doing a Christmas special you guys can tune into. Thank you so much, Brooke. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and just, since I got you guys here with me, I'm just going to share the website. Kiara Winwriter, this is the one we just did. Next level awareness. Some things that are coming up at Portal to Ascension in the New Year's. So we have Geraldine Orozco, Holographic Universe, Fractals, Galactic Origins on January 5th. Priestess Mystery Schools, Miraculous Conception, the Womb Portal. This is actually going to be some information talked today about Immaculate Conception, divine births, and the womb, and how beings come through the womb. We got Mary Rodwell, Star Children of Planet Incarnations. We're doing a free event. The Year of the Dragon is over in a couple months. So we're doing a free The Year of the Snake event. We have the Orion Star System Conference coming up next year. Meet the Arcturians, Moon, Mars Anomalies, and Inner Earth, Hybrid DNA, Pythagoras' Life, the Mary Magdalene Conference, Saturn and Elohim Conference, Reconstructing the Matrix. So we're going to hit the road running next year. So yeah, Tim Tactics, you got it there. Guys, let me just take a moment and just say thank you all so much for tuning in. We got a lot of things in store for us over the next few years. Energy is ramping up. Disclosure is underway. 2027 is going to be a milestone in a lot of things coming out and being exposed. This is a moment, and always just take care of yourself. Use this opportunity to grow so that we can become the people and the caretakers of this new planet. You know, and if there's any lesson from this story and the Yeshua story, is that let's stop giving so much validity to the external and start honoring the internal, so we can have that beautiful balance and really respect ourselves and give ourselves the love that we need. And the talk that is coming up is Tim Tactics. If you type Tim Tactics on YouTube, you're going to get his show. He's live right now. I'm going to be on there in a sec. Love you all. Have a beautiful Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Solstice, New Year's Day, New Year's Eve. And we'll check you out later. Okay, take care.